The security guard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Sir, this section is for invited guests only." The sentence dropped like cold rain against the quiet buzz of the stadium. Jack Barnes paused mid-step, one hand still holding his crumpled invitation, the other tucked behind his back, where the fabric of his military jacket felt stiff with age and memory. A few rows ahead, proud parents adjusted ties, clapped their hands, and took photos of their children walking across the stage. Nobody looked back. Nobody noticed the man who had limped across deserts and bled on steel decks, being told he didn't belong here. But his son did. Noah Barnes, dressed in a deep blue graduation gown, waited backstage, oblivious to what was unfolding at the far edge of the seating area. He had earned the highest GPA in his class, led the science club for 2 years, and was chosen as the valedictorian to speak to the graduating class. Today was supposed to be about him, but Jack wouldn't let him walk alone, not after everything they had been through. Jack tried again, unfolding the letter from the school administration, the official invitation that clearly stated VIP parent access, front row. The guard barely looked. Another man stepped forward. His tone was polished, but laced with dismissal. "That's not the issue," said Carson Hale, in his tailored suit and polished shoes. "We're simply trying to maintain the decorum of this ceremony. I mean, look at him. That uniform doesn't even meet modern standards." Jack looked down at himself. He had polished the boots that morning. The jacket still bore his old unit patch, and his chest, though smaller with age, still carried the medals they'd given him when he left the Navy SEALs after his final tour. He wore them not to boast, but because today, his son had asked him to, because it meant something to both of them. Still, Carson kept speaking. "This is a school event, not a war memorial." One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The other turned to Jack and gently motioned for him to step back. Jack Barnes didn't argue. He didn't protest. With quiet dignity, he folded the letter back into his pocket, nodded once, and began walking away from the reserved seating area. His limp was more visible now, especially on the concrete steps, but he didn't ask for help. He simply found an empty seat far from the front, far from the soiree where his son would soon stand, alone. Up on the stadium's elevated platform, the school orchestra played a bright medley. The crowd cheered as the ceremony began. No one turned around. No one noticed the man who had come early, who had waited quietly, who now sat alone in the shadow of the bleachers. Jack watched the stage through old eyes that had seen too much war and not enough peace. But nothing had shaken him quite like watching Noah grow into himself, watching him struggle and fight, and finally say with trembling but steady breath, "Dad, I like boys." Jack had only nodded. Then he had stood up and hugged him, hard, fast, without a word. That was years ago, and nothing had changed since. Not even today. Except today, the world had decided his presence wasn't the image they wanted. While Jack sat alone backstage, Noah was adjusting his graduation gown. He had pinned something to it, something small, something meaningful, a tiny rainbow enamel pin tucked near the collar. It had been a gift from Liam, the boy he had once kissed after school before Liam was transferred to another district for his safety. Noah didn't know yet. He didn't know his father had been turned away. He didn't know Carson Hale, the same man whose son used to shove him into lockers, was now telling the school board that Jack Barnes was a visual distraction. That Jack Barnes, the man who carried both scars and silence, wasn't suitable for the front row. But Noah would find out, and when he did, something would shift. Not just in him, but across the stadium, across the entire story. Because even when the world turns its back, some things stand taller than ceremony. And the truth, the kind that wears both medals and rainbow pins, refuses to be escorted out quietly. If this moment moved you, stay with us through what comes next. The story doesn't end here. You're watching Heart Stories, where silence ends and dignity begins. Noah stood in the waiting tunnel behind the stage, Clutching the thin sheet of notes he had rewritten 5 times the night before, his fingers trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of everything this day was supposed to mean. He glanced down at the small pin near his collar. It was barely visible against the dark blue of his gown, a simple rainbow enamel heart, no larger than a button. It had once belonged to Liam. They had met in 10th grade, fell into each other's lives like gravity, fell apart just as fast when Liam's parents pulled him out of school after a photo of the 2 boys kissing in front of the lockers made it online. Noah had kept the pin. It was the only thing he didn't delete or throw away. Today, it was his quiet answer to years of being told to tone it down, act normal, stay silent. As the student ahead of him stepped onto the stage to accept a diploma, Noah turned to one of the event organizers, a staff member with a clipboard and headset, and whispered, "My dad should be in the front row, Jack Barnes." The woman didn't respond right away. She spoke softly into her mic, waited, then leaned closer to Noah. He's been seated elsewhere. Some guests expressed concern about the uniform. Noah's heart skipped. Concern about a uniform his father had served for decades. He had earned every badge and bruise on that jacket. And now, because it wasn't modern enough, because it didn't match the rows of pressed suits and quiet pearl necklaces, they had moved him. Noah didn't argue. Not yet. Then Carson Hale stood up. He was already near the stage, talking to another organizer. His voice carried easily, like someone used to being listened to. "I hope this school understands that this is not the time or place for political statements," he said, gesturing toward the platform. "If that boy walks out there with that pin, I'm pulling my funding from next year's scholarship program." A few heads turned. Whispers spread like a ripple. Noah looked up and saw Carson's eyes on him, cold, sharp, as if he were something to be managed, not celebrated. The school principal was called in. She walked up to Noah gently, with a hesitant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're still welcome to pay," she said, lowering her voice. "But would you consider removing the pin just to keep the atmosphere respectful for everyone?" Noah didn't respond. He reached up, slowly, and touched the pin, the one thing he had chosen to wear today that wasn't assigned, pressed, or pre-approved. He looked at it, then at the principal, then at the stairs leading to the stage. Then he stepped aside, not toward the podium, away from it. He walked quietly back down the tunnel and turned into the corner where no one was looking, where the cheers and music couldn't quite reach. And there he stood, still breathing, but not moving. The ceremony continued as if nothing had changed. Carson sat down, satisfied. He leaned back, adjusting his cufflinks as the next student name was called. Noah's name wasn't. No one noticed the gap on the program. No one asked why the valedictorian didn't speak, except one person, far from the stage, from behind a pillar in the last row of seating. Jack Barnes had seen the exchange. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He recognized the look in his son's eyes, even from a distance. The tight jaw, the lowered gaze, the quiet retreat. He had seen that same look in the mirror once, years ago, when they told him he wasn't fit to serve anymore, that he was damaged, too broken to lead, too quiet to matter. Noah hadn't said anything to him that morning about the pin. He hadn't needed to. Jack knew what it meant. Knew it wasn't just about identity, but about courage, the kind that came wrapped in silence and stood taller than words. Backstage, Noah leaned against the wall, gown heavy against his shoulders, hands loose by his side. He hadn't cried, not yet, but the pin was still there, and someone was about to see it. The name Noah Barnes echoed through the stadium speakers, but no one walked onto the stage. At first, no one noticed. The announcer paused, eyes scanning the side curtain, then moved on to the next name. The audience clapped politely, none the wiser. Just another skipped name on a long program of graduating students. But the front row noticed. Carson Hale sat back in his chair, crossing his legs with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed he had kept order. His son, seated 2 rows behind, wore the same smirk Noah had come to know far too well in high school hallways. To them, it was over. Another soft voice removed, another statement silenced. What they didn't notice, what they couldn't see, was the figure that had just stepped out from the furthest corner of the crowd. Liam. His black suit was simple, no tie, no colors, just a clean jacket and dark shoes, hair neatly combed, eyes fixed on the side of the stage. He hadn't planned on coming. He had told himself it would hurt too much, but something had pulled him here, something heavier than regret. He hadn't expected to see Noah walk away, and when he did, he didn't hesitate. As the orchestra started up again, Liam slipped through the rows of plastic chairs and climbed the side path to the curtain where Noah stood, still hidden from the crowd. He found him alone, shoulders forward, pin still gleaming softly near his collarbone. Liam didn't say anything right away. He reached forward, slow and deliberate, and adjusted the rainbow pin, not to change it, but to center it again. Then, quietly, he whispered words Noah barely registered at first. "You're still the bravest valedictorian I know." Noah closed his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to explain the weight, or the silence, or the familiar ache of being told, once again, that his truth made people uncomfortable. Behind them, the crowd remained unaware, but something had shifted. Back in the stands, someone else stood up. A girl in the 5th row, hair tied back, pulled a rainbow bracelet from her bag and slipped it over her wrist. She said nothing. She didn't wave it or shout. She simply wore it. Another student followed, a boy from the science club, who pulled a tiny rainbow flag from his back pocket and laid it gently across his knees. They didn't speak. They just stood. From the end of the staff section, a teacher slowly rose from his seat. He was a man of few words. His service had ended long before any of the students here were born. His face was lined with years and sun. But when he removed his cap and stood tall, the way soldiers do, every motion carried the gravity of memory. He stood facing Jack Barnes, still seated alone, still watching from a distance. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, nothing else mattered. Noah saw it too. From behind the curtain, he turned his head just enough to see the quiet defiance blooming across the crowd, the small, wordless rebellion of those who had hidden long enough. One by one, they stopped pretending, stopped shrinking, and yet Carson Hale stayed seated. He adjusted his expensive watch, glanced around, and whispered to the person beside him, "They're just kids. It'll pass." But it wouldn't, because something had been lit, and the ones who stood weren't backing down. The principal shifted in her seat. She glanced toward the stage, then at the section where Jack had been sent to sit. Her fingers curled nervously around her notepad, as if sensing that the silence she'd helped create was becoming louder than any speech. Still, Jack didn't move. He hadn't stood yet. His hands were clasped, resting on his lap, his gaze locked on Noah, who now walked slowly toward the stage steps, not to return to the podium, but simply to be seen. The pin still shimmered, and now the eyes that had looked away began to look up. What began as one missing name was becoming something no one could skip. Noah didn't rush. Every step he took across the wooden platform echoed just enough to catch the ears of those who had stopped paying attention. There was no announcement, no spotlight, no introduction from the staff, but the sight of him, silent, steady, walking with eyes wide open, pulled attention like gravity. He didn't carry the paper anymore. The speech he had written, the one carefully edited to please administrators and parents alike, had been left in the corner behind the curtain. In its place was only a stillness, one that stretched out over the stage like a held breath. Noah stood at the center. The microphone was there, but he didn't touch it. He faced the crowd, the pin on his collar visible under the stadium lights. And then he began to speak, not from the page, from the place they had asked him to hide. "My name is Noah Barnes," he said, voice clear but low. "I am the valedictorian of this class. I am also gay." There were no gasps, only quiet. The kind that comes when something long unsaid is finally spoken aloud. "I wear this pin," he continued, fingers resting briefly over his chest, "because someone once gave it to me when I needed to remember I wasn't alone. And I kept it, because I knew one day I'd stand here and choose not to hide anymore." He paused, eyes finding a single point in the crowd. "My father is sitting at the back of this stadium. He's wearing an old military jacket. You might have missed him. Some of you moved him." The principal shifted in her seat. Carson Hale glanced sideways, lips tightening. Noah didn't raise his voice. "But that man," he said, "is the reason I'm alive. Not because he's a soldier, not because he taught me discipline or sent me to school, but because when I came out to him, he didn't flinch, he didn't yell, he didn't leave." Noah's voice broke slightly, just enough for the silence to deepen. He said, "Thank you for trusting me with the truth." The stadium didn't cheer. No one clapped yet. They simply listened. "And today you told him he didn't belong at the front, that his uniform didn't match your expectations, that maybe somehow he was too much for your photographs, too loud for your comfort." Noah took a breath, the kind that pushes through everything held in. "Well, I came here to say he belongs more than anyone else I know." It was quiet still, but something stirred. A student stood, then another. Across the side sections of the stadium, rows of young people began rising to their feet, slowly, without applause, bees. Some reached into their pockets and pulled out small rainbow pins. Others raised bracelets, or bandanas, or tiny handmade flags. They didn't wave them. They just stood with them. And then a sound, soft at first, came from the faculty section. It was the scrape of a chair. One of the teachers, a tall man with a stiff shoulder and a quiet past, removed his cap and placed it under his arm. He faced the back of the stadium, not the stage. He stood straight, still, silent, a gesture not of protest, but of honor. Noah followed his gaze. Jack Barnes had not moved, still seated, still watching, but Noah knew what that look meant. The set of his jaw, the stillness of his hands. His father hadn't left because he wasn't allowed to be seen. He stayed because he wanted Noah to be the one seen, on stage. Noah's voice found its calm again. "There's a difference," he said, "between pride and noise. I didn't come here to make a statement. I came here to thank the person who never asked me to be less." Then he stepped away from the microphone, not dramatically, not as a finale, but as someone who had said enough and left the rest in the open air. No applause followed, just stillness, a kind of stillness that holds, that waits, that listens, because something was coming, and it was wearing more than a pin. For a long moment, no one moved. Noah had stepped down from the podium. The pin still shone on his collar, catching sunlight as he walked across the edge of the stage. All around him, students remained standing. Rainbow colors glimmered like quiet sparks across the crowd, not loud, not planned, just present. Then it happened. From the back gate of the stadium, 6 men entered. They didn't arrive with ceremony, no announcements, no music, just 6 sets of boots on concrete, no medals, no rank displayed, but their walk told a different story. Sharp posture, measured pace, eyes focused. They wore dark suits, not uniforms, but there was no mistaking who they were. Jack Barnes saw them first. He didn't stand, he didn't wave, he only looked, and the one walking in front gave the slightest nod, a language spoken between men who had once faced death shoulder to shoulder. As they moved toward the front, whispers started. People noticed the way staff parted without instruction, the way a few teachers stood straighter, and when the 6 reached the stage stairs, One of them broke away, walked up calmly, and took the microphone Noah had left behind. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. His voice was low, deliberate. "My name is Michael Reyes. I served with Commander Jack Barnes. There were 6 of us on our last mission. He brought all 6 home." The silence grew deeper. "I was told," he continued, "that this man, this veteran, was asked to sit in the back, that someone questioned whether he belonged here today." He paused, eyes scanning the front row. Then he looked toward Carson Hale, not with anger, but with precision. "Let me make this clear. If Jack Barnes doesn't belong in the front row of a public high school graduation, then no one does." Gasps rippled through the audience. Michael stepped back, and the rest of the SEALs joined him at the base of the stage. Together they turned, not toward the principal or the crowd or the school board, but toward the man in the old jacket sitting in the last row. Jack didn't move. Not yet. But then something shifted. Noah had left the stage by now. He crossed the field slowly, toward where his father sat. The students began turning, too, watching not the stage anymore, but the man who had been hidden in plain sight. A chair was cleared in the front row. One of the security guards, the same one who had turned Jack away earlier, stepped forward, his face pale. Without a word, he gestured toward the empty seat, then stepped aside. Jack stood. His movement was quiet, steady. He didn't straighten his back for effect. He didn't fix his medals. He simply walked forward, the limp in his leg visible but unapologetic. When he reached Noah, the boy held out his hand. Jack took it. They didn't hug. They didn't speak. They just walked together, the way they always had, through discomfort, through judgment, through silence. And as they took their seat in the front row, side by side, the entire stadium rose. Not with applause, not for a performance. They stood because something inside them did. Carson Hale did not rise, but he was alone in that choice. Cameras clicked. The school principal wiped her eyes, and behind the stage, 6 veterans in dark suits stood at ease, not as guests, not as symbols, but as witnesses to a moment when one man's quiet honor lit a fire no one could extinguish. Jack sat beside his son and looked forward. Noah turned slightly and whispered, not to be heard, but to be felt. "Thank you for showing up." Again. Jack only nodded. He always had. When was the last time someone stood up for you, not with words, but with presence? Tell us in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, follow Heart Stories for more real, powerful moments where silence breaks and truth stands tall.